The Turkish general election of June 2015 took place on the 7th of June 2015 in all 85 electoral districts of Turkey to elect 550 members to the Grand National Assembly. This was the 24th general election in the history of the Turkish Republic, electing the country's 25th parliament. The result was the first hung parliament since the 1999 general election. Unsuccessful attempts to form a coalition government resulted in a snap general election being called for November 2015. The Justice and Development Party, which had governed Turkey since 2002, lost its parliamentary majority and won 258 seats with 40.9% of the vote. The main opposition Republican People's Party also fared worse than the 2011 result, and won 132 seats with 25.0% of the vote. The Nationalist Movement Party had been projected to win over many disaffected voters from the AKP. Its share of the vote increased, and the party won 80 seats with 16.3% of the vote. The New People's Democratic Party decided to contest the election as a party rather than fielding candidates as independents. Despite concerns that it could have fallen below the 10% election threshold and lose all representation in parliament, the party fared better than expectations. It won 13.1% of the vote and took 80 seats, the same as the MHP. The potential for a hung parliament had been widely considered and predicted before the elections of the country, and politicians were better prepared for the constitutional process that would follow such a result. Campaigning before the election focused mainly on a faltering economy, the political conflict between the government and the Gulen movement, and Turkey's involvement in the Syrian civil war, growing allegations of government corruption and authoritarianism, mainly originating from the 2013 corruption scandal and the 2013 Gezi Park protests respectively, were also part of the issues and developments raised during the opposition campaigns. The vote was seen by some as a referendum on President Recep Tayyip Erdogan's call for an executive presidency. Electoral fraud claims and political violence caused controversy in the run-up to the election. Several candidates and party officers were subject to politically motivated attacks, culminating in the death of 4 HDP supporters after 2 bombs exploded during a rally in Diyarbakir on the 5th of June. The interference of President Erdogan, who was accused of covertly campaigning for the AKP under the guise of public opening rallies, was also controversial since the president is constitutionally required to exercise political neutrality. Despite fraud claims dating back to the hugely controversial 2014 local elections and numerous claims of misconduct on polling day, the election was largely praised by the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe for being well organized and was declared free and fair by the European Parliament. Background: the governing Justice and Development Party sought a 4th consecutive term in government. Its leader, Ahmet Davutoglu, who had taken over from Recep Tayyip Erdogan in August 2014, sought a full term as Prime Minister of Turkey in his own right. The AKP's goal was to win more than 330 seats in order to have the right to put constitutional changes to a referendum, or more ideally 367 seats to bypass a referendum and change the constitution directly within Parliament. The Republican People's Party aimed to surpass the 30% boundary and to form a government, potentially with the help of smaller parties or in its own right. The CHP's leader Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu had publicly stated that his party would target 35% of the vote, a rise of 9% from its 2011 result. In order to be able to form the next government, popular support for the Nationalist Movement Party had surged during the 2014 local elections, and it aimed to participate in a coalition government. However, several politicians from the CHP and MHP resigned in protest against their unrealistic electoral prospects, and formed their own parties. The most prominent breakaway party was the Anatolia Party, formed by former CHP MP Emin Ulker-Tarhan in November 2014. Other significant factors that opposition parties would also need to overcome were issues such as media bias and electoral fraud, both of which increased sharply in the preceding local and presidential elections. Electoral cycle. This election is the last election, presidential, local and general, scheduled in Turkey until 2019. Arguments as to whether this is by chance, or whether it was planned by the Justice and Development Party government when they proposed to reduce the parliamentary terms from 5 years to 4 in the 2007 constitutional referendum, are still ongoing. Speculation as to what the AKP government will do during 4 years of electorally unchecked power should they win generated both favorable predictions and concerns. While 4 years without elections may allow the government to undertake widespread necessary economic reforms, critics of the AKP argue that it is an opportunity to further erode the diminishing checks and balances and separation of powers in the Turkish political and legal systems. The AKP also support a presidential system, which would give greater powers to President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Early general election. The AKP government had allegedly proposed to hold an early general election in November 2014 if the candidate Recep Tayyip Erdogan won the 2014 presidential election, especially due to opinion polls predicting a comfortable victory for Erdogan in the first round. This would allow the AKP's new leader to seek an electoral mandate in their own right rather than serving the remainder of Erdogan's term before seeking re-election. Although Erdogan did win outright with 51.79% of the vote, his popular vote share was significantly below what opinion polls predicted. The presidential election results, according to several political commentators and journalists, greatly reduced the possibility of holding an early election, although some reports claimed that the government were preparing for an early election in April 2015. In October 2014, the AKP parliamentary group leader Naci Bostanci ruled out any prospect of holding the election early, and Prime Minister Ahmet Davutoglu stated in November that they would be held in June as per normal. Despite this, speculation in December 2014 as to whether the election would be brought forward in order not to clash with summer examinations remain. In the end, no such initiative was taken, and Supreme Electoral Council of Turkey went on with the date the 7th of June. Some schools changed the times of examinations in order to not clash with polling day. The AKP were widely expected to target at least 330 seats in parliament in order to pursue constitutional reforms. In the 2014 local elections, the AKP won 42.87% of the vote, which would have translated into 285 to 300 seats had it been a general election. The opposition Republican People's Party would have won 130 to 145 seats. The Nationalist Movement Party would have won 75 to 85, and Kurdish nationalist independent candidates would win between 30 to 45 seats. Even if the AKP had sought backing from independent Kurdish candidates as part of the ongoing solution process with Kurdish PKK rebels, rebels, it was still unlikely that they would have held a sufficient number of seats to put constitutional changes to a referendum. As a result, the prospect for an early general election on political grounds diminished. Issues and developments. The main issues that formed the agenda during the run-up to the election included the solution process with Kurdish separatist rebels, the political conflict with the Gulen movement in the Turkish political and legal system, an economic slowdown, as well as the growing political polarization in Turkish politics. The murder of Özcan Aslan and the 2014 Soma mine disaster also raised the issues of women's and workers' rights respectively, while calls for minority rights for Turkey's Kurdish and Alevi minorities were also made by the opposition. In the run-up to the election, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan also held controversial rallies, during which he openly called for a presidential system of government. The prospect of a presidential system, as opposed to the current parliamentary system, also dominated the agenda before the election, as well as Erdogan's influence in the political system despite being required to remain neutral by the constitution. The 2015 general election was the first general election to be held after the anti-government Gezi Park protests in 2013, and also the first since the 2013 government corruption scandal, in which many AKP politicians, including Erdogan, had been incriminated. The AKP's foreign policy, the ongoing Syrian civil war, and the rise of the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant were also key issues. In late 2014, ISIL's siege of the predominantly Kurdish city of Kobani in Syria caused deadly riots in southeastern Turkey, with many Kurdish citizens protesting the inaction of the Turkish government. This resulted in the government passing a controversial domestic security bill that gave significant powers to the police forces, with many opposition politicians and the European Union accusing the AKP of placing Turkey under martial law and turning the country into a police state. Turkey's declining human rights record, growing censorship, and the authoritarianism of the AKP government also therefore dominated the agenda and the opposition parties' campaigns. Revelations confirming that national intelligence organization lorries that were sent to Syria in January 2014 were in fact carrying weapons also resulted in accusations of high treason and war crimes being made against the AKP government. Electoral system. Turkey elects 550 members of parliament to the Grand National Assembly using the DONT method, a party list proportional representation system. In order to return MPs to parliament, a party needs to gain more than 10% of the vote nationwide, meaning that parties may win the most votes in certain areas but not win any MPs due to a low result overall. The parliamentary threshold of 10% has been subject to intense scrutiny by opposition members, since all votes cast for parties polling under 10% are spoiled and allow the parties overcoming the national threshold to win seats much more easily. E.g., in the 2002 general election, where the AKP won with 34.28% of the vote but won nearly two-thirds of the seats, the parliamentary threshold does not apply to independents, meaning that Kurdish nationalist politicians who poll strongly in the southeast but are not able to win 10% of the overall vote stand as independents rather than as party candidates. This was the case in the 2007 and 2011 general election, where the Kurdish Democratic Society Party and the Peace and Democracy Party fielded independent candidates respectively. Electoral districts. Turkey is split into 85 electoral districts, which elect elect a certain number of members to the Grand National Assembly of Turkey. The Assembly has a total of 550 seats, which each electoral district allocated a certain number of MPs in proportion to the population. The Supreme Electoral Council of Turkey conducts population reviews of each district before the election and can increase or decrease a district's number of seats according to their electorate. In all but 3 cases, electoral districts share the same name and borders of the 81 provinces of Turkey, with the exception of Izmir, Istanbul and Ankara. Provinces electing between 19 and 36 MPs are split into 2 electoral districts, while any province electing above 36 MPs are divided into 3. As the country's 3 largest provinces, Izmir and Ankara, are divided into 2 sub-districts, while Istanbul is divided into 3. The distribution of elected MPs per electoral district is shown below. A total of 8 electoral districts had the number of MPs adjusted since the 2011 general election by the Electoral Council, as listed below. The 2 electoral districts of Ankara also had the boundaries changed. Contesting parties. On the 1st of February, the Supreme Electoral Council of Turkey announced that 32 parties fit the criteria in order to field candidates in the general election. In order to be eligible, parties need to have formed local organizations at least 6 months before the election and have completed the party congresses by the election. Furthermore, they need local party offices in at least half of the 81 provinces of Turkey. Of these 32 parties, 21 decided to submit candidate lists for election. The deadline to do so was the 7th of April 2015 by 1700 local time. The delegation of one party, the First Party, suffered an accident on the way to deliver the candidate list to the Supreme Electoral Council and was subsequently delayed by 22 minutes. The number of parties fielding candidates therefore fell to 20. The Free Cause Party and the Rights and Equality Party both announced that they would be fielding candidates as independents in order to bypass the 10% election threshold. The Communist Party contested all 550 seats by fielding female candidates only. The parties contesting the election are listed below according to the position on the ballot paper. Party leadership elections. Numerous breakaway parties, such as the Anatolia Party, the Democratic Progress Party and the Nation and Justice Party, were formed by former MPs of the CHP and AKP. In the end, only the Anatolia Party fielded candidates for election. The AKP, CHP and MHP all held leadership elections in the lead-up to the election, with Ahmet Davutoglu elected unopposed as the AKP leader during the party's first extraordinary congress in August 2014. The MHP's longtime leader, Devlet Bahçeli, was re-elected unopposed during the 2015 MHP Extraordinary Congress, with his rivals unable to gain enough signatures to contest the leadership election. Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu was re-elected as CHP leader during the party's 2014 Extraordinary Convention, defeating his rival Muharrem İnce. The HDP has a co-presidential system, where one male and one female leader are elected. The party's chairman and chairwoman are Selahattin Demirtas and Figen Yüksekdag. Many opposition commentators and opinion polls show that the public largely regard President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the AKP's founder, who constitutionally must remain neutral as president, as the de facto leader of the AKP. Of the 20 parties contesting the election, only 2 party leaders were women. These were Emin Alkurt-Tarhan of the Anatolia Party and Özlem Şenabe of the Communist Party. potential coalitions and pre-election alliances. Polls showed that the AKP, CHP, MHP and potentially the HDP were the parties most likely to enter parliament during the election. A poll also showed the Anatolia Party polling close to the 10% parliamentary threshold at 8.04%, though more recent polls did not show the party to command significant support. Any party winning below 10% of the vote does not gain any parliamentary representation and has the votes reallocated to the winning party's vote share, giving them a large winner's bonus. A coalition government had been widely considered as a potential outcome of this election and the first to be formed since 1999. Foreign embassies in Turkey have expressed their expectation for a coalition, while speculation in the media has centered over the possible makeup of the incoming government. In April, the CHP announced that it could form a coalition with any party that supports judicial independence and the separation of powers, and hinted at a possible CHP-MHP-HDP coalition. Since all three parties are fiercely critical of the governing AKP, it was perceived to be unlikely that the MHP and HDP, which are right-wing Turkish nationalist and left-wing Kurdish nationalist parties respectively, would join a coalition together. This was confirmed when MHP leader Devlet Bahçeli recommended that those who suggested such a coalition to see a doctor. However, the MHP formed a coalition with the center-left Democratic Left Party in 1999 and fielded a joint presidential candidate with the center-left CHP in 2014, making a potential coalition with the CHP a possibility. The HDP have also signaled a potential coalition with the CHP, though co-leader Selahattin Demirtas staunchly rejected any electoral alliance between them. On the 2nd of June, Demirtas stated that they would never form a coalition with the AKP but would consider a coalition deal with the CHP. Despite Demirtas's staunch opposition to an AKP-HDP coalition, the AKP were widely expected to negotiate with the HDP in order to put a series of constitutional changes to a referendum. In order to do so, the government would need 330 votes in parliament, with the HDP and AKP's joint seats totaling 338. A confidence and supply agreement with the HDP in such situations where more than a majority vote in parliament is needed was considered as a possible option. The MHP have a history of helping out the AKP, most notably during the 2007 presidential election. An AKP-MHP coalition is therefore also a possibility. The center-left Democratic Left Party said that it would consider joining a coalition with the CHP should it win representation in parliament, though ruled out a pre-election alliance deal that the two parties had made in the 2007 general election. The Patriotic Party proposed a merger with the CHP on the condition that it stood up for the 6 principles of Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, though the CHP has said it would not take such proposals seriously. Two minor parties, namely the Revolutionary People's Party and Socialist Workers' Party of Turkey, backed the CHP. In the event that ANAPAR did enter parliament, a triple CHP-MHP-ANAPAR coalition would have been likely. According to the newspaper Cumhuriyet, a senior CHP politician was quoted as saying that an AKP-CHP coalition with Abdullah Gül as AKP leader is a potential eventuality. Gül, who was president of Turkey from 2007 to 2014, was known for his mediating stance in contrast to Recep Tayyip Erdogan's controversial and allegedly polarizing speeches at times of political crisis. The Nationalist Movement Party claimed that they would consider an electoral alliance with the Felicity Party and the Great Union Party, but said nothing regarding the Conservative Ascension Party, which had long called for a union of nationalist parties. In the end, the MHP decided not to pursue a formal electoral alliance, but said it was open to defectors from any party. The MYP subsequently announced support for the MHP. The BBP has since decided to contest the election under the SP banner, and will thus be absent from the ballot papers. The Nation and Justice Party planned to join the SP and BBP, but it did not actualize. The new electoral alliance between these parties was named the National Alliance. The candidate lists were drawn up such that BBP candidates were placed top in electoral districts in which they won more votes than the SP in 2011, while SP candidates were placed top in provinces in which the SP had beaten the BBP in 2011. This meant that an SP candidate was placed first in 55 provinces, while a BBP candidate was placed first in 30. The remaining positions subsequently alternated between SP and BBP candidates. The True Path Party expressed its intention to form an alliance with 6 other parties in order to overcome the 10% election threshold. The party's leader Sitan Ozar Chigagos met with the leaders of the Centre Party, Rights and Equality Party and the Great Union Party, MPs standing down. The 2015 general election was the 4th general election contested by the governing incumbent Justice and Development Party, since the party observes a bylaw that imposes a 3-term limit on its MPs. AKP parliamentarians elected in 2002, 2007 and 2011 were unable to seek re-election in 2015. Many AKP MPs standing down due to the 3-term rule were either former or serving ministers, 9 of which were serving in the outgoing First Davutoglu cabinet. The People's Democratic Party observes a 2-term limit, meaning that all MPs elected in 2007 from the Thousand Hope candidates bloc and re-elected in 2011 from the Labour, Democracy and Freedom bloc were unable to contest the election from within the HDP party lists. Despite the party's specific term limits, numerous MPs declined to run again despite being eligible to. Most of these candidates came from the Republican People's Party, from which 15 of its 125 MPs did not submit applications for re-election.